and this is the panel discussion, Be More Giant. I am Dr. Sarah Fry, and I will be chairing the discussion about how we can reclaim our landscapes through collective art experiences rooted in community rituals and inspired by ancient traditions. And the talk will delve into art, play, and myth-making, and how it invites us to forge deeper connections with the land and with one another. I'm joined by 5 wonderful panellists this evening. We were going to have a 6th panelist with us, but unfortunately Dr. Zakia Mackenzie can't make it this evening. So let me first of all introduce you to Becca Gill, who's the artistic director of the company Radical Ritual, and she's also the artistic director of the Consequences Project. She's an artist and a producer with experience of outdoor arts, community engagement, and mass participatory events. At the end over here, we've got Grace Emily Manning, who's worked across performance design, experimental animation, and fine art, and her practice responds to landscape psychology, history, and folklore. Next to Becca, we've got Nick Hayes, who's a writer and an illustrator, and whose recent book, The Book of Trespass, calls for more public access to nature. Next to Nick, we've got the next Nick Llewellyn, who runs Access All Areas, which promotes inclusive performance for screen work and for theatre work by learning disabled and autistic artists. And the next, we've got Sita Brahmachari, who's an internationally celebrated and award-winning author, and whose work focuses on community cohesion and environmental protection, exploring themes of homes and belonging. And for my part, I'm a medieval historian, so absolutely no art background whatsoever. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Historical Research at the University of London, and my specialist period is the 11th and 12th century. And my current work has a focus on bringing out the voices of those people who are traditionally underrepresented in the historical narrative. And I come to this project having met Becca last year when I spoke at a conference on the subject of giants. And this included me talking about the appearance of giants in the historical record. As long as nobody got shot, we're okay. I also spoke about the medieval historical narrative of these giants being the original inhabitants of Britain and the communities, particularly in the West Country, who have a strong tradition of giants as part of their folklore. And this has been an area of interest for me since I worked on the archaeology of the Cerne Abbas giant in Dorset in conjunction with the National Trust and Bournemouth University, and then me writing a chapter in a new book on the giant where I looked at images. Has that stopped? Oh, no, but images of over the last 25 years in the digital age. And in case anybody in the room's not familiar with this giant, this is the 180-foot chalk giant cut into the hillside just north of Cerne Abbey. And he's the naked figure. I'm worried that one of us is going to get shot soon. And do you think? Yeah. Let's do that. I've got it. Oh. Is that working? Yeah, that's working. That sounds a bit better, doesn't it? And yeah, so when I looked at the Cerne Abbas giant, I discovered a socially responsible giant with no longer a small sort of community focus, a global presence, raising awareness of good causes and specific health concerns, sporting facial hair for Movember, advertising sort of beating bowel cancer, and also having a 21-foot plastic condom put on him for Family Planning Association to mark Sexual Health Week. So when I first spoke to Becca last year at the conference, I knew she had a focus on art and an interest in historic giants and not much more. So when Becca approached me this year and asked if I could help out with the community art project and a talk titled Be More Giant, I was thoroughly intrigued and wanted to know more, so here I am. So today, this conversation that we'll have today, we've got a range of questions that I'll ask to our panel, all about the artwork that's going to be created and about all the things that inspire our panellists. And I'm going to start with Becca. And I know I mentioned to everybody in the audience that you're the artistic director of the company called Radical Ritual. And would be really great if you could explain to the audience what the company's all about and how it came to be set up.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm amazingly grateful that you're part of our project and advising us, because you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. So yes, I'm Becca. I set up Radical Ritual last year. So very, very fresh company, with the sole purpose of trying to reconnect us back to our public spaces and back to our landscapes. I have this kind of feeling that we've lost track of our myths and our stories that connect us not only to the landscape itself, but also the geography, the nature, how to take care of our landscapes that used to live within our myths and our stories that were so prevalent thousands and thousands of years ago. And thinking about that now, so connecting to communities now to create new myths, new stories, and to do that in a really big way. So it's kind of ambitious, but we want to do things that are quite giant. We've been talking a lot today in residency about awe and wonder and access to that, and how some privileged people are more able to access those kind of awe, wonder moments. So we want to create some more of those in incredible democratic ways. So we're all about citizens' democracy, and also about opening out the process. So this team of wonderful people, and there are more in the audience. So we've got Douglas Dare, who's a composer that we're working with on Consequences. We've got Ina Miller and Emily Williams, who are working with us on the production side of the project. So it's a big team, and Zakiya Mackenzie, who's not here this evening but is part of the team. And that's how I want to work. I don't want to just come up with the idea on my own and go off and make it happen. I want to work with other incredible experts or wonderful people in the world to enable us to do that. So yeah, that's Radical Ritual. This is terrifying, this mic. Yeah.
It's all fine. And I think that probably leads us on to really nicely Radical Ritual, but actually this whole project, so I know this evening's called Be More Giant, but the actual project itself is called the Consequences Project. So could you just talk us through a bit more about what that's actually going to mean and how the communities will be able to be involved in it?
I was very, very lucky and very grateful to National Landscapes and to Activate Performing Arts and to Nature Calling and Dorset National Landscapes specifically to be commissioned to create the first of these ambitious projects, and that's called Consequences. And in essence, it's a giant game of consequences. So I don't know if you've played this game, but you draw the head, and then you pass it on to a friend, and the next person draws the body, pass it on to another friend, they draw the legs and the feet, and then you unravel it to see what crazy creature you've created. And they're quite often funny or ridiculous or entertaining or bizarre or strange. This comes from a surrealist tradition that was created by the surrealists many years ago, to kind of tap into the subconscious, to be very spontaneous, and also to create things that are more than the sum of their parts. So the idea of Consequences is to do that, but to do that on a grand scale, next to the Cerne Abbas giant in Dorset, where it will be unveiled in front of people and then toured to two other locations, to Corfe Castle and to a hill in Yeovil. And Yeovil is particularly important because we're working with the communities in Yeovil to create this. So each of the body sections are created by different groups in Yeovil. Different people will be creating the head, the body, the legs and the feet, and no one will see the full creation until it's unveiled in, I can't tell you the date because we're keeping it all under wraps at the moment, in Dorset this year, Becca. Oh my God. And this amazing team of people are making this all happen. So we've had a wonderful residency today, and I think we'll talk more about how it's going to happen in a minute.
And just very quickly, I think everybody, I sort of mentioned the giant, the Cerne Abbas giant itself is 180 foot. So I know that's feet and that's about 55 metres. How big is this artwork actually going to be?
Intended. It's pretty much the same size. So it's a tiny bit smaller because of perspective, but it's pretty much the same size as the giant. Yeah.
So I was going to say a very large artwork that will be able to be seen from up in the sky, and everybody who stands below it will be able to see it. Lovely. And thank you ever so much for that, Becca. So moving on to Grace, with the Consequences project and your interest in the landscape, could you, I know you're going to be heavily involved in all the materials that go into making this project and this artwork. Could you talk us through some of the materials and the things that have actually inspired you with this artwork?
Absolutely. Becca spoke about, when you were saying about the intentions of Radical Ritual and the project, the word connection and reconnecting. So the materials for me are that tangible connecting force where we can invite and encourage people to kind of look close to home, look to their local environment and have a tangible experience with those materials and an understanding of what you can actually do with them. So we started today by looking at some chalk, which was collected from the first site visit that we went on. So it was from the Kernabbas giant. And we just went through the process of actually grinding that down and breaking that down into a paint. And I think it was Sita you that said kind of the effort that's involved. So instantly just working with one earth pigment and going through that process, which I don't think many people actually have the experience of. So that's one of the things that we'd actually like to bring into the workshop room, and also on the walks that we're going to do with people, be able to go and kind of look and go, okay, here's a stick and that's what you can use to make charcoal. That's the second thing that I brought in today, was really experimentally looking at different plants, alder, bramble, gorse root. So gorse was up on the Kernabbas giant, there was gorse, nettles and brambles, and it's just looking at those quite common plants that we have around us and more interesting ways of what you can do with them to create art materials. And charcoal, I think, is a really interesting one because it takes us way back to this idea of having a fire and kind of like access to having a fire, and how many people actually kind of do that anymore, and are there environments, collective environments, where we can get together, have communal fires, make charcoal together, use that as a drawing material, that becoming a ritual. So that's one of the ideas. And then I bought a selection of inks, so kind of extracting colour from plants. I tend to work with plant pigments a lot and dyes a lot. So there was alder bark. Alder's a really interesting plant that I've started tapping into and didn't have to go that far to start tapping into it. It's just a brook behind my house in kind of suburban Birmingham. And it's this process of looking at something which I'm going through as an artist and going, oh, I can use the cone. Oh, what about the bark? What about this? And it's that kind of curiosity that hopefully we're going to bring and encourage and inspire in people to kind of look at one plant and think what you can do with it. There was other materials that I brought in today that I think have more of an interesting kind of, what I say, material kind of culture, so more of a history around them. So I brought indigo and woad, and thinking about those materials. So woad was something that's not non-native. I'm really speaking today about interested in these words that we use for plants and how they've kind of how socially they kind of, you know, we say things that are native and things that are invasive, but really when you think about, you know, how plants migrate and how things are so no one died, did they? So intermingled, that it's very complicated thinking about kind of what is native and what is not. So woad was something that was constantly kind of brought in as a trade plant, because this blue that you kind of adorned your body with, that gave you a sense of belonging and identity and power, that was then cultivated, but it was a weed, so we stopped cultivating it. So I wanted to bring into the room these materials that have really interesting stories and cultures to use as starting points, and curate a palette that brings in plants and pigments from other places, and juxtapose that with things that are ultra local and of the place and of Dorset. So what I've brought today is very local to me. Nettles that are from my garden, brambles that are from my garden. I think this is really important, to be looking at what we can do with stuff that's right around us. I love these plants like buddleia that are everywhere that we can use a lot of, so I think I'd like to include some of that in the palette. And what the palette says, and it's beyond kind of colour. Yeah.
Is that working? Yeah. That sounds wonderful, and it sounds like it's going to be a lovely natural colour palette and quite vibrant as well. And I think a sort of follow-on question from that. Is there any one landscape in particular that you would say has really helped grow your art practice and how you look at all these plants?
Yeah, again, looking locally, so I grew up kind of on the Thames estuary out in Kent, so it's sort of suburban London, and the kind of area that I had access to as my playground was called Swanscombe Marshes. So it was a new build estate that was next to this kind of wasteland, so it was like unmanaged for a long period of time. And I know more about it now because I went to do my master's in animation, and I was in an environment where you're kind of pushed to make things kind of personal and really investigate things. So my art practice has kind of built my ethics and a kind of method of working with the place. But Swanscombe's really interesting. It's so multi-layered. There's a 400,000-year-old skull that's been found there that was called Swanscombe Man. It turned out to be female. So that's kind of really Paleolithic, and then there was a cement factory on the landscape for 150 years, and then it's kind of turned to brownfield land, and then they wanted to build a £5 billion theme park on it called the London Resort. So a big project that I put together was called Brownfield Sister, which was me kind of making protest banners and sculptures that are from waste plastics that all get washed up along the Thames estuary. So I use a lot of natural things, but I also just use materials that are found in a place to make work about that place. And it's really kind of Swanscombe Marshes that was my formative years that I had access to. But it was always been someone's owned it. There's signs saying, don't go here, don't go there. But that was the place I had access to, and that's what kind of built my curiosity into materials.
Wonderful. Sounds like it's going to be a great array of things that you're going to be able to use and all your knowledge to go with it. And I think sort of changing tack just very slightly. Obviously, we've been talking about the artwork being revealed at the Cerne Abbas Giant, and obviously that's a landscape that we've got the Cerne Abbey there, we've got the religious landscape, we've got the dissolution of the monasteries happening there, and then we've got sort of the great landowners around Dorset exploiting the landscape in different ways and running thousands and thousands of sheep there. And I know the Consequences project obviously will help us reconnect with the landscape, but I'm going to bring in Nick Hayes now because he's actually been involved and co-founded the Right to Roam campaign. So really interested if you're able to talk us through the notion of rural culture and what other ways we can use to get that culture back again.
Hello. Yeah, does that work? Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. It sounds amazing what you've done, and like it's kind of cool to be here because this used to be a commons, was taken over, and now is a commons again. And look what fucking happened. 400 people come here every year to create culture. I feel like what landowners have is the law that they wrote themselves, or their ancestors did in the 1800s, and that says we own this exclusively, and that means that every single other person on earth either has to ask my permission to come here, or get fucked. Basically, like you're not, exactly. It's the gamekeeper with a poor shot. But what we have is not ownership, but we do have belonging. And they took away our belonging when they took away our land. And now we have to pay rent, or we have to pay tithes, or we have to ask permission, or we have to pay an entrance fee to the gate that was put up 200 years ago. But we don't just have to do that. In a way, what they have is their title deeds, their legislation that says they own it. But in response, we have our culture, our rural culture, that says we belong here. And I don't really know where I get it from, but I just have this conviction that our culture is stronger than their law. They're sort of the same words, L-A-W, law, that's what they've got. And we've got L-O-R-E. We've got culture, we've got law, we've got traditions, we've got foraging, understanding of our local hedgerows. There's not a landowner on earth that knows every inch of the land they own. That's the people that work on the land or trespass on the land down, on the marsh that you were on. Whatever tarmac or cement company that owned it doesn't have a clue what nettles grew where or which brambles could be extracted for which colour kind of thing. incrementally, those are the knowledge and the creative practice that allows us to assert our belonging. And there's something about consequences that is another, just sat here up on stage. When a landowner asserts their will upon 200 acres or whatever, that's a mono message that becomes a mono crop, that becomes, from the sort of, the sort of mono ideology of profit driven. This inch of land, how much can I squeeze it for to just put coin in my pocket? Like with consequences, when it's a commons, you don't get to force your mono message on. You get something much more enriching, which is seeing what mad, weird, crazy ass shit people draw on the bit of paper underneath yours. And when you unfold it all together, it just occurred to me that's what, the kind of, I don't know if anyone here knows Kumbafe, or the kind of leaders of the sort of modern negritude movement, people that are really fighting sort of anti-colonial, anti-racist, people that are kind of, as I see it, forging the new commons of the future, which is global. And what they're really talking about, Tyson Yunkaporta is another Aboriginal scholar that writes about this, is emergence. When you take away the dominance of a mono message, or this is my bit of paper, so I'm going to draw my drawing on it, when it's all of us unfolding there, the diversity, the weirdness, this is why it's a surrealist thing, because it leaps out of the plan and becomes something that is only possible through the sum of its parts, through every single person. Now imagine if we were using not a piece of paper, but a landscape. And really, by imagining that, you're remembering the commons. That's all it was. It was people with an equal right who had to use dialogue and had to listen, because obviously listening is the major part of dialogue. And what comes of that is something much more creative, much more culturally enriching than any single one person's mono message in this room. And I think that's why it's exciting. Amongst other, it's also exciting.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up. Well, community coming together, very much so. And if I can move on to other Nick sat next to Nick. We've obviously talked, and Becca's said that we're going to unveil this artwork as well next to Corfe Castle. And obviously, unlike the sort of more rural landscape of the Cerne Abbas, we've actually got that sort of very built, sort of imposing castle structure that's transformed that natural landscape, a really iconic monument down in Dorset as well. And obviously, a whole swathe of people have been traditionally sort of excluded from the castle boundaries. And you do an awful lot of work about bringing a whole part of the community with learning disabilities and autism together in the work that you do. What do you feel about this kind of artwork and it being unveiled in this way, in this type of built landscape? How important is that for you?
Yeah, super important. Is it working? Is it working? Yes. Yes, there we go. Oh, there's the shot. Yeah, super important. Just from a historical point of view, I'm not a historian, but with Axel Areas, we did a huge project a few years ago called Madhouse, which looked at institutionalization of people with learning disabilities living in these big institutions, and sort of from the industrial period till the deinstitutionalization in the 1970s and 80s. Many people with learning disabilities were incarcerated in these quite horrendous big institutions that some of us will remember from our childhood. And so for us, it was really about that project in particular was really about kind of looking back at that history and thinking, what was life like before people were moved into institutions, And a big part of our research, working with the Open University, who have a social history of learning disability department, they said that actually people's lives were much more inclusive in the community, that often people with learning disabilities were, much more kind of connected to their communities, to their small towns and villages, and that, people worked as well, that they were doing, I read that they were doing small errands or, working with the farm animals or even scaring crows away, but actually that there was more of a sense of a community there. And I think since people being moved into these institutions and the horrific stories that we all had seen over the years, and then that big move to care in the community in the 1980s, obviously people's lives, became a bit more enriched, and, agency and support in the community and independence, and a good education was kind of, was really hard fought for. And then you sort of, since austerity in 2010 onwards, you saw all of that kind of positive moves kind of, be reversed, and people's lives have become much smaller again. And so this project was sort of looking at, how the big institutions and the big walls have been now confined to people's bedrooms, and that only 1 in 4 people actually have a meaningful activity to do once they turn 21. And there's a huge cliff edge for when you leave special needs school into sort of adult social care, of just people kind of falling off the wagon, really, and just not having any meaningful activities to do, not connecting to their local communities, kind of mental health issues increasing, and so forth. So I think a project like this is really, really important to reconnect with what we lost during the Industrial Revolution, and to really connect back to the land, and to really think about what it means to be a citizen of our community, and that this notion of being disabled or being not disabled, and all of those kind of labels that have been kind of put onto people over the years. I mean, some of those labels during the Victorian era, like the Idiot Act and the Mental Deficiency Act, and all of these horrible acts really incarcerated people and labelled people with different levels of subnormality. And, it's taken many, many years for this, very neglected, marginalised community to kind of really shake off all those assumptions and, awful kind of prejudices and discrimination that people have suffered, and to kind of really reconnect with what it means just to be human and to be kind of in a place of care and belonging, really.
Is it working? Yes, it is. And then, thank you ever so much for that, Nick. And then, Nick, if I can come back to you again, and going back to the Cerne Abbas giant and all of its ongoing folklore that it has. And I know that you're really keen in the different campaigns and things that you do to use myths and folklore about people's rights to belong to nature, even if they don't earn the land. And can you talk us through how important ancient traditions and folklore are communities, and how they can form symbols of collective community resistance? And I know you've been involved in the Esme Bogart campaign, and just the importance of those kind of campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot to say. It's awkward as well, because the Esme Bogart campaign, I didn't create it or anything, but it did involve a member of the audience here whose eyes I'm avoiding at the moment. The Duke or Lord or whatever, fucking Earl of whatever, decided that even though he didn't live in his 50-room, Grade 1 listed Elizabethan brickwork mansion, which is like a 20-minute walk away from my boat, he was going to evict a family of 7, granted only 5 of them lived there at the time, from their house of 26, 27 years, with a Section 21. Hands up, who knows what joys a Section 21 brings? Yeah, there he is, yeah. Section 21 means a landlord can turf you out of your house without any reason, basically. You can not default on your rent. You can pay every single month of every single year that you've been there. Transfer about 200 grand into the good Lord's bank account or thereabouts, and he can give you 3 months warning, and that home that you've raised your children is no longer your home, and you have to fuck off, basically. So we as a group, and this was a group that I'd kind of ducked my head in when I drove my boat off the Kennet and Avon Canal, and put it on the Thames around the Hardwick Estate, South Oxford Way. And there was already a thriving rural arts community there. I'd grown up on the other side of the river, and I'd had no knowledge of it. And it was kind of everything I was looking for. People were connected. People helped each other out. People built the culture that we go to on festivals or fetes, and this particular space was a actually a bit of a yard outside the thing, and people got together there to fabricate, to make stuff. You need space as an artist to make stuff. But obviously, this lord, who didn't even live in the area, he has another couple of thousand acres in East Hendred, which is in Oxfordshire. That's where he lives. But obviously, they were just trying to tart up the house and flog it on to the, the down from London's, blah, blah, blah. Like same old boring mono message. It's his A4 piece of paper, and he'll draw whatever ugly shit he wants on it. And it was amazing to see people decide that no, like whether this works or not, we're going to resist it. And Esme Boggart was a name kind of plucked from the hedgerow. And there was something powerful in a load of people that hadn't necessarily acknowledged their connectivity, just help each other out. We were doing the same thing, we're artists, coming together under one banner. Calling yourself something, raising a witch. There's no witch story in the Thames Valley that we know of. In that respect, I think English people are particularly impoverished when it comes to the lore and the folk, the fables, the kind of stories and mythology that connects you to the land in a way that, say, Lakota tribes in North America, when they were resisting water pipelines being built through, they had, in that area, 200 years, but realistically about 10,000 years of folklore that supported their belief of belonging over this new European notion of exclusive ownership. But the English don't have that. We have very, very scant knowledge of our heritage of belonging, because essentially the idea of exclusionary ownership was either invented or very early imported into England, and it's become our bedrock baseline norm. So we kind of invented a witch, resisted the eviction, bought another year or so until the inevitable happened, because it takes a lot of time and energy and resources to resist anything. I think the major component is the pragmatic that no one really talks of, which is the people are coming to evict you, the lawyers, the estate managers, all of those people, they're paid to do their work. Resistance is very, very rarely paid. And so it all has to be snuck in like after work or after the school run. But there was something about the collective that made me think about giants again, and the idea that maybe giant, historically in Northern European culture, is actually a metaphor for when communities come together and act as one. It was very David and Goliath when the aristocrat tells you you have to leave. I'd imagine it felt very lonely and vulnerable, but when 100 people come together, when 200 people come together, then you can be bigger than the corporation that decides that it can operate its will over you. And so through that campaign, I think I became slightly obsessed with the idea of manifesting community into one persona. And once you've got Esme Boggart, then you can just say, she did it. You can do what you like and say, it wasn't me, it was Esme Boggart. And Esme Boggart, and they did this in England, Captain Swing, this Lady Skimmington. I don't know if anyone knows about the Skimmington riots. When the stakes were so high, when you were going around burning hayricks and destroying the Duke's, modern machinery or what have you, you would sign, I think, Captain Swing in the Swing riots, you would sign under this moniker because it was too dangerous for you to look the Lord in the eye. But there was something also deeply unsettling for the Lord in that he knew that Lady Skimmington or Jack Swing or whoever, or Esme Boggart was an entity, a corporation almost, of people that he could not single out. You can pull one of them out and the entity continues to exist. I think there's a profound strength in that when it comes to radical resistance.
I was going to say, so as soon as this project came up titled Be More Giant, you couldn't resist it, could you? Well, I certainly couldn't resist it because of my interest in giants too. And I think, Sita, we've come to you next. And I know we've talked about the importance, Grace has talked about the importance of landscape in her art practice. Nick's obviously spoken about the importance of all the ancient traditions, but also bringing those into modern communities. And I know your writing and your work has a focus on community cohesion, which will be so important with the production of this artwork. Can you tell us about your sort of communal listenings to the landscape and beings, and how this has influenced all your, and I can see there's books on Sita's lap, and how this has influenced all your work and practice?
Well, we've been talking about giants, and I bought a tiny, tiny book here. This is a patchwork storytelling quilt story that Grace and I did together. I met Grace because I'd written a book which was really inspired by growing up in the Lake District. My father was from Calcutta. My mum is from the Lake District, and my heritage sort of spanned those storytelling connections. My dad used to talk about himself being suspended between worlds, which I thought was something that I found quite difficult to understand when I was a child. And he said, when you are born in one country and you go to another country and you fall in love and you have children in that place, you are very much part of that place, but part of you is also very much connected to Calcutta, to the cousins, the brothers and sisters that are still there. And I was fascinated by that as a child. I grew up in the 70s in the Lake District. We were very rare as a mixed heritage family in the Lake District, and my mum was from a working class family whose own farming dwellings were submerged under the Haweswater Dam, and my father once had a place in Bangladesh which also went under the water. And as a child, I was kind of trying to weave together the histories of my father and my mother, and a sense of not quite belonging in this place, which I still feel is, we can all think of a place where we feel utterly at one with the earth and nature and with ourselves, and the Lake District is still that place. I told my partner that if I go before him, then he has to take me to the top of the mountain, of the fell, and he said, it would be you, you'd make me go on a long walk. So very complicated connection to that landscape that I had, which I have written about. Since I was 40, I wrote my first novel when I was 40, and I call myself a sort of communal listener when I write, and we've had an amazing day today of listening and meeting and not being kind of online and somebody saying, Brexit this or this, ridiculous. But looking at each other and trying to find the connections between each other. And that's why I think this sort of gathering is just so valuable in these times where we find ourselves. I'm going to just tell you a little bit of story, because that's what I do in my tiny, tiny book, which Grace and I sort of put together. I've been writing stories since before I could read, but I never told my stories to anybody. This idea of who belongs and who finds a voice in the landscapes in which we live is still very connected to me as I work with refugee people and families who maybe start in London when they first come to the centre, but then quickly go to Cardiff or go to the Lake District or go to somewhere else. And I find, against the story of the narrative that we hear every day in the media, working class people who welcome refugee people from the Congo, and they take them on walks in their landscapes. And people talk to me, the people I've met in London from the Congo, who first of all didn't speak much English, who then find themselves in Cardiff or wherever they find themselves, start to talk about their hill, their landscapes, and they start to bring of themselves to those landscapes. My dad was a doctor. He never got a practice in the Lake District, but I was able to put him as Dr. Sherpa in my novel Kite Spirit. So how we write ourselves into the landscape, both emotionally, spiritually, and practically, is an act of radical hope. and dreaming, and it isn't in the past, it's right now in the present, and we're doing it now. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Sita who held many stories inside her, but somehow couldn't find a way to tell them. The world seemed too busy and noisy, but when she was very young, she found a listening tree. It was a beautiful willow beside the river Eden, where she lived with her family, surrounded by awesome mountains. On weekends and holidays, in every season, Sita would seek out her tree. There she would cradle nature's store, serenaded by river music in all its moods and glories. Back then, little Sita would never have believed that one day all of these tales would become books for children. When Sita left home, she was sad to leave her listening tree, but soon discovered that she carried it inside her. All she had to do was close her eyes and imagine herself back there. Years later, when Sita had become a mother of 3 children, she met an artist called Grace, who sewed Sita a quilt containing inspirations from all her tales. And so it was that Sita finally became an author, flying around the world on Grace's patchwork storytelling quilt, spreading the word that word weaving is a lifelong joy and a treasure hunt of the imagination. And a treasure hunt of the imagination is what we've been invited to do today and on this amazing project, so that the groups that we meet will walk up to the giant, and on the way they will viscerally feel the landscape, and they will know that wherever they are from in the globe, their footprints are part of that history and what they're bringing to that history, and they are not outside of it. They become part of it. And it isn't a past that just has to be thought of as a full stop, but as we walk on that landscape, as I hear my dad's voice speaking in the mountains of the Lake District, it is a different bird song. And every plant that is there has migrated at some point. And for me, an act of radical hope is how we connect through belonging to the landscapes on which we walk, our ancestors walk, our cousins in India walk, our cousins in the Lake District, wherever we are, wherever our threads in the world stretch out. And in the ways in which we can feel despair at the way that the world is going, and there are giants in this world who I find very frightening, we can ask the groups that we work with, where is the power that makes you feel giant in the world, that doesn't make you feel tiny? What can you do in your communities, in your landscapes, to reach out to the people around you, to make them feel a little bit more giant? So although I work a lot with children and write stories for children, I was saying to Nick, I have got away with murder writing these children's books. In Where the River Runs Gold, there are paragons, which are a very few people in society who own most of the wealth. There are freedoms, which are the majority of people who are compromised constantly by having to live lives that they don't feel are ethical lives. And there are outlanders who refuse to buy into the system. But they don't get any of the benefits, like education for their children or healthcare. There is a Syrian beekeeper in Where the River Runs Gold who was inspired by Dr. Riyad Al-Sus, who is contributing to communities in Yorkshire, who was a refugee survivor from Syria, a real person, somebody that could have passed through the refugee centre that I work in London. And he doesn't just carry his skills of beekeeping with him. He carries his stories of what the mythology around bees. Then he brings them from Syria, and he contributes to the landscapes that he now lives in. So I feel that this project is an act of radical hope because it's a project about continuity and about constantly questioning who we are and how we can be giant.
Sita, lovely. So I think one final question, well, probably 2 questions for everybody, and I think Sita's alluded to this. Why is this Consequences project important now? And if there's one big hope for this art project, what would it be? And I don't mind who would like to answer first or not answer at all.
I'm just going to go straight in with materials again. But if what we're laying out, as I've said, I would really hope would encourage people and all of the different groups that we're working with to look at the environment around them in a different way and look at that environment with curiosity and know that you don't have to travel very far to understand something better, the earth pigment, the paint pigment. I've always come from the belief that making art is one of the most kind of natural human things that we can do, that everyone can draw, that a mark making is something that's unique to you and you can look at it and you can understand it and it shows you something about yourself and your belonging in the world. So on the material side of things, I was just having a conversation about this. I would love a radical shift in the materials that we use, that children use, that is used in schools, that aren't, plastic felt tip pens, paints that are made with plastic, petroleum-based materials, that there's a radical shift in the things that we're using and the schools, and we can kind of work cross collaboratively, and that you can garden something in a school or look at the branches that have been cut down, looking at the byproducts that are made to actually make art materials and bring them into the classroom and find safe ways of doing that, find sensitive ways of doing that. And I think through the connections of this project that those sorts of things could be made possible.
Has anybody else got? Lovely.
Well, I hope that people can find friends. And sometimes it's not about the giant things that happen on these projects, but it is about the connections that are made, because those connections through love, even though it can be difficult to negotiate difference, those can create giant changes in communities.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing actually. Just not on just making friends within their own communities, but when all the community groups come together and that whole unraveling of the artwork, friendships being formed there. And what I would love, if there's a future project, Bex, which is, kind of then integrating community groups together and, creating new work and reconnections with other parts of the community as well.
I was saying earlier, obviously in the 70s, they tried to make people not drop all of their plastic that they were sold along with the food they bought. So they said, leave no trace. Something really insidious about telling people to leave no trace in their homes and the countryside they walk in and the places that they love. Certainly the next 10 years of my life will be propagating leaving maximum trace of cultural, biodegradable, respectful, knowledgeable, but beautiful trace that celebrates humans as much a part of nature as any other living flora or fauna. Because our creative spirit is something to be proud of, I think.
I completely agree. I'll pass you.
I agree with all of those. I really hope that it leaves a legacy. And we were talking today about myth and creating a new myth. And that feels like quite a bold thing to do. It feels, at first I was like, is this a bit of an ego thing to do? Like to say that you can create a new myth when this is kind of quite sacred, really, to do that. But I would hope that together with the communities we could create something that lasts, that lives on within those communities and that could stay there and possibly be repeated year after year, that creates something new, but that sits and lives within those communities and stays there. That's what I would hope. A bit like you, but, in no, but in terms of creating something that stays, that's what I would hope for.
Thank you ever so much. And I'm just sort of looking at time. I know we started a bit late, but I have a feeling we're going to have some questions in the audience. So I think if we're all okay, I'm going to say thank you to all of our wonderful speakers and showing us how that through art, play and myth making, we can make all those different new connections with the land and with one another, helping us to reclaim our landscape and be more giant. But yes, thank you all for coming along to listen. But yes, I think there's a roving microphone over here. And when we've passed you the microphone, please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organisers, Simon and 101. and thank you to the speakers. I'm a grassroots community organiser here in Newbury, and I've been involved in a number of different projects over the years, including protest. And one of the things that struck me, and I don't consider myself to be an artist, but I've always tried to be involved, the creative minds and individuals who come together in protest and campaigning kind of bring people in, and that narrative. Do you believe that the people, maybe not named as individuals, will be the future myths and are the myth makers? People like and I know Nick, with his illustrations on the trespass books and everything, but we've kind of lost that myth making, as you said. This is a real opportunity to re-establish that connection with art, protest, and landscape. And I think I'd like your thoughts on who are they going to be making those myths.
With consequences specifically, we're working with different groups for each different part of the body of the giant. With the head, we're working with young people who are neurodiverse. For the heart and the torso, we're working with people from the global majority. For the legs, we're working with adults with learning disabilities, and the feet, we're working with primary school children. And we're working with all of those communities in Yeovil, in South Somerset. So those are going to be the people who will be making that myth. Who knows in the future who'll be making the future myths, but those specifically are the people that will be owning and then taking forward, hopefully, that myth that's created.
Can I quote Noel Gallagher in this situation? This is not. I was quite impressed. Documentary Live Forever. Just in terms of who are the people that are making the new myths. I could reel out a long list of heroes that are like 20 years younger than me. The future is bright and the future is young. But it's the crucial difference is there's no name. There's no one name. Any adulation or any following of any one person. I think what's crucial is that the English society has to wake up to their power as a collective. And Noel Gallagher on Live Forever, good documentary, talking about Nebworth, he must have been smoking something. Like he strikes me as quite an ego, not someone alien to his own enormous ego. But he was talking about Nebworth, and he was like, the thing that made it fucking blinding was not Oasis or Nobby or whatever, Liam or anything like that. It was every single fucking person that turned up 2 nights in a row to sing along to the tunes. So Noel Gallagher had written these tunes in his bedroom and clearly thinks, he's a lyricist of some merit and blah, blah, blah. But fair play to him, thousands of people sing those songs together, and he was right in that one moment that the thing that made Nebworth was every fucking soul that was singing their heart out there. And if that was how we responded to fracking, if that was how we responded to eviction, to Section 21s, like literally, we'd have England back. And so I think it's no one name. It's us or.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dominate this, but one of the problems is we've got divide and rule. So we're encouraged as a white working class to punch down to migrants, people of fear the other, if you like. How do we bring back that collective consciousness? There's been moments when we've had a glimmer of it in the past, but certainly in the last decade, it's been absolutely under attack from all quarters. And how do we? And I personally, I think art and community are key to that, because whenever you bring disparate, diverse peoples together and unite them in art as well as protest, you see that cross. That was a beautiful little story that you read there, and I think that that really resonates when you get people. You talk about fracking, you know, some of these, you know, the lanterns, you know, some of the things that we use there up at Preston New Road, for example, you know, and the artists, you know, who worked around Great Missenden and, you know, on the HS2 protests, you know, there's a connection to the earth, you know, that artists seem to have, and I really respect that with the artists. So, thank you again, and that's my final word.
No, it's fine.
Of the live stream, sorry for the worldwide audience. This isn't a question. It's just I happen to be writing a history of radical street music at the moment, and it's just a comment. What you're just saying is it's about the Big Red Band, and they're just talking about drowning Thatcher out during the miners' strike. Loads of miners around 10 Downing Street, thousands of people just singing together, drowning her out, and I think that comes to the Big Red Band. So there's a whole history of radical street bands, which I'm interested in, but it's that collective modes of collective action, like street bands, like lantern making, things like that, are a really good tool to bring people together to express themselves. They don't necessarily change things. That's another question, because that happens at the time. But it was just a comment on just what you were saying. Is that it was just something I was reading today, and it's like that's a way of doing it.
So going back to memories and the kind of memories that sustain you. And I remember my dad singing Joan Baez's We Shall Overcome, completely out of tune. It was his favourite song. And I remember watching physically as a child his body change when he was singing this song. He was strengthened by singing this song. And protest songs are becoming very popular again now for a really good reason. And one of the things in the workshops that we will do is we will find a refrain which comes from the words that the communities are giving us, and find a way to thread that into some memorable phrase that we will repeat together, so that even, say, a child who's recently, you know, come to this landscape and may not have very much English, they will go home with that phrase and they will spread it to their families or their communities, and will give it a tune so they can hold it in their head and they can hold it in their heart. I just wanted to give you one of these refrains that was sung at the South Bank by one of the refugee women from the centre, who's a priest in her country. Her name's Angèle. And it's, "This is home where we belong, in this heart, in this song. This is home where we belong, in this heart, in this song." Go on, don't leave me on my own. "This is home where we belong, in this heart, in this song. This is home where we belong, in this heart, in this song."
Have we got any more questions? I think we're one more. We've got time for one more there.
It's actually maybe a question for the end of the project, but at the moment now, there's such a lot of brilliance in the room. I wondered if you could tell us how we could be more giant.
I don't know the answer. Anyone else? I think we've said it. I think it's. Grace is going.
I would just say expression. I think there's ways that everyone can find a way that express themselves that makes them feel good. That's how you can be more giant, in my opinion. That's why art's important to me, because it's my thing that makes me feel good. It's the thing that makes me understand myself, and that might not be a kind of creative form, but there's got to be something within us, and we can ask people around us to kind of help bring that out of what that expression is, and really work on that expression. We use the word practice because it's something that we practice, and you do it more, and you do it again, so it's bigger and bigger and better and better, and that's what I believe can make you more giant. Yeah.
Oh, one last thing about treading more lightly. So working together and then treading more lightly, which kind of comes into being more gentle, caring more, listening more, holding people more. Today, I am so grateful for this team, and Sita kind of embodied it in that moment. It's been extraordinary working in this room with these people, with this apothecary of stuff here. And I think it's extraordinary when you come together as a group, and when you come together as a wider group, the things that you can make happen. So that's what I would say.
And I think that brings us to time now. So I'd like to say thank you ever so much to our 5 wonderful panellists. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening for the conversation that we've had. It's been wonderful, so thank you very much.